Welcome to session 2 of the Parasha Vayishlach. Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated. We are going to discuss it. So, for those of you who are joining us just now, you might want to go back and watch the first session of Vayishlach. It's basically going to kind of get into a little bit of a discussion about what exactly was happening with Jacob and his angels or his messengers or God's angels or God's messengers. And although I promise you this is all leading up to something, we need to address something. And that is going to be basically something from Romans chapter 9. Now, I will preemptively state that there is a very inappropriate doctrine in some sects of Christianity. Some of the denominations of Christianity believe that God actually creates things for evil and that God creates things specifically to go to hell. It's a Calvinist thought process, but it's really Augustinian. And truthfully, it is actually Marcionian. We mentioned Marcion in the first installment of this today. And what we discussed is how he was labeled a heretic, but there were many things actually kept from his theology, doctrines, etc. In fact, most Christians today believe that the Old Testament is governed by wrath and the New Testament is governed by grace. And there are a number of theologians out there who believe that that is to lead us to salvation, which we need to get into as well. So, before I continue, I need to probably, let's see, hold on, let me share my screen here real quick. We need to go ahead and share this Romans verse with you, okay? So let me just give you guys a brief brief summary of the purpose of the book of Romans. A lot of people who study the book of Romans don't realize that Paul is actually confronting rabbinical theology, and he's not necessarily challenging all of it, but he is challenging some of it, and he's trying to put in two very important points that end up becoming the whole of what the reality is. Now, first and foremost, and this is important, is the letter is not to common people. The letter of the Romans are to the brethren in Rome, which is what? A reference to Pharisees. Now, it's very important that you understand that one of the mistakes that Christianity has made is making doctrine or formulating doctrine off of Pauline theology, when in fact Paul would himself have frowned upon that. Ultimately, and this is important, is if the book of John is authentic, and John himself says that the word, which would be the Torah of God, because any time in the Old Testament where the word of God is referenced, it is not the 66 book compendium of Protestant American Christianity. It is not. It is not the New American Standard canon, okay? It is ancient theological references to Torah. When it says that Yahweh's word would not return void, it is a reference to Torah. When it says that they have violated his word, it is Torah. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. What word? What did David have? David had Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and his grandmother was Ruth. He had Samuel as what? His life story. And so it is important in our discussion to acknowledge and understand that if the word became flesh and dwelt among us, the ultimate authority is the Torah and Yeshua's words, and they better match because he's the Torah. The Torah became flesh and dwelt among us. Why is this important? Because people make the mistake of taking Romans and making it doctrine. And what's insane about it is what I'm about to talk to you about. Okay? So in the concept of total depravity, we have an ideal of there being a sentiment that mankind is evil. And furthermore, that mankind is destined to go to hell and cannot avoid it, right? Why? Because we were created by the demiurge. This is Marcionian doctrine. Who's propagating it? Augustine. Who was Augustine's student? The one who taught Calvin. What was Luther's sect of Catholicism? Augustinian. He was an Augustinian monk. And so when we are working with a sentiment of theology, we are working in error. It is not okay to contradict what Yeshua said. Yeshua says to a group of Jews who do not recognize him as the Messiah. And how do we know that? Because they walk away shocked. They say, this man speaks as one with authority, not like one of our teachers. He doesn't talk like one of these rabbis. He's talking on a higher level. But what's crazy about it is what he says. He says, you are the light of the world. Who's he talking to? Is he talking to you? Not. See, this is the crazy part is you think because you read Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, that it's talking about you. When the truth is that his audience were Jews, not Gentiles. And in addition to that, not only were they Jews, but the premise is they were non-believers, according to Christianity's standard of believer. Meaning what? Meaning we may need to rethink our theology a little bit. Well, one of the things we need to rethink is this total depravity, because what it does is it makes it seem as though we were created in error, and even worse yet, we were created to perish without Yeshua, right? Oh, but it gets worse. So then they have the second tenet of Calvinism, which is what? Unconditional election. Literally, that God chooses some and not others, and there are no merits behind it. So when we get into Romans chapter 9, which we're about to do, I want you to understand, hey, you're not supposed to be making doctrine from this verse. Okay? You're supposed to make doctrine from Yeshua's words and from Torah, and that's it. Psalms is about a commentary on Torah, on the love of Torah. Proverbs is the wisdom behind Torah. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel are all what? Complaining about people's violations of Torah. Yeshua says, I have not come to destroy the law. Where's that? Oh, in the sermon. In the sermon to the Jews, I have not come to destroy the law. Why did he say that? Because he was about to make some interpretations of Torah that they had never heard before. He says the law won't pass away till all things are fulfilled. You know one of the things that's in the law? that Israel would have their land. Do they have their land right now? Nope. They are double occupied. They're occupied in the north by Syria, in the south by the Palestinians, and actually I should say in the southwest by the Palestinians, and in the south by Jordan. Who's Jordan? Edom. According to the map, according to the location of Esau. And so, interestingly enough, we have what? Sons of Moab, Ammon, and I'm sorry, the sons of Lot, Ammon, and Moab actually becoming Jordan. But behind Jordan, where a lot of the property of Jordan is today, is Esau's territory, Edom. And why is that relevant? Well, because of the verses that we're about to look at, yes, but what I'm saying is Torah said, the Torah promised Abraham a certain geographical boundary of his descendants. Not done. Has not happened. And so guess what? Torah is still in play. Nah. Okay, so now, and this is important, and forgive me for getting excited. I'm extremely hyperactive, so you're going to see me dance all over this chair right now. But the premise is what I want you to see here, and this is important, is Romans chapter 9 in its true context. Okay? Romans chapter 9. So where do they get off with this stuff? Like, why is it that they think they can get away with this, right? I'm using the NASB, and there's a reason that I am. Let me explain this real quick. The NASB has the New Testament in lowercase and the Old Testament references in caps. So whenever you need to see a verse from another place, it's in caps. But better yet, it also, a lot of the times when an Old Testament verse is quoted, it is footnoted, which is important. Okay, and so let's go ahead and jump into this. So it says, for this is the word of promise. At this time, I will come, and Sarah will have a son. Okay, that's the word of promise. Why was that important? Because Paul has just proven that Israel are the children of promise. Okay, whose promise? Abraham's. Look, right here. But it is not as though the word of God has failed. What word of God? Torah! For they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel, nor are they all children, because they are Abraham's descendants. But through Isaac shall your descendants be named. Paul quotes him here. Paul quotes Torah here, right? And then that is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but children of the promise are regarded as descendants. Oh boy. What promise? At this time, I will come and Sarah will have a son, right? And not only that, but there was also Rebekah when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac. For though twins were not yet born and had not done anything good or bad, so that God's purpose according to his choice would stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls. Okay. It is said to her, the older will serve the younger, just as is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I've hated. Notice that is in caps, which means what? This verse is somewhere else. Okay. This verse is somewhere else. We'll use the treasury of scriptural knowledge to look that up. But first, I want to ask the question, what does it mean of him who calls? Well, let me tell you something. Here, let's get out of here for just a moment. Let me tell you something. This is the doctrine of irresistible grace. So basically, short version is that Calvin says, well, they're totally depraved. Where do you get that? Marcion. Marcion believed that that humanity went through an evolution of evil because of Adam, right? And that original sin marked us as destined for hell, all of Adam's sons. Okay. Then Augustine turns it around and says, not only are they totally depraved and that they can't do anything good, but also that means that God created people to go to hell. So now here you are, human. According to Moses, you get 75 years to get it figured out. And because you were designed to burn in eternal conscious punishment, if someone brings a tract to you, you can't respond to it. If someone told you the gospel of Jesus Christ, you can't respond to it. Do you hear how absolutely psychologically sick and demented? And no wonder there's weird stuff going on in the Catholic Church, and how you can't marry people and all this other hogwash that are part of the concept of the priesthood. We've got a lot of really dark, egotistical constructs. So why do I bring this up? Well, we need to ask a question, don't we? We need to ask, when did God start hating a human being? And does that theologically sound correct when we deal with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Does that theologically sound correct when we deal with the concepts of the chesed and the loving kindness, I can't remember the Hebrew word right now, but at the very least, chesed, right? The mercy of God. Okay, so that's kind of what we got to get into here. But you got to understand that's kind of Christianity at large. Really, kind of, we're working with the Presbyterian theology there versus, say, like a Episcopalian theology versus a Congregationalist theology, which the three main theologies of Christianity are I'm not thought theologies, hierarchies of church government are Congregational, Episcopalian, and Presbyterian. So why do I bring this up? Because Episcopalian is not just a Protestant sect. Episcopalian is a style of church governance that contains a certain type of doctrine that kind of has to do with the vicar or the representative of God here on earth, like a special prophet who basically represents God's mouth here on earth, versus the Presbyterian, which is going to be more the presbytery, the eldership, a group of elders or a board of directors, that kind of how they had it with the disciples, where people brought the money to the disciples distributed it, etc. And then, of course, Congregationalists believe that you're only supposed to just kind of have a house congregation and nobody's the boss, and whatnot. Okay, well, the relevance behind this has to do with the doctrines. So when you hear somebody say, oh yeah, I'm an evangelical Christian, well, they're probably dispensationalists. Well, guess what? That's actually a Calvinist derivation. It comes from Calvinism. It's the idea that God changes his mind, but also that he deals with humanity according to how they respond to him. And so he deals with them in dispensations. So he dealt with the Israelites through the law, the age of the law. And by the way, this is also a Rashi doctrine. Rashi actually believed that there was an age of chaos, an age of the law, and then there was going to be an age of the Messiah. But the problem is that the Messiah didn't come. Of course, he was a Jew who believed the Messiah didn't come. What's my point? My point is that doctrine is directly tied into the governance of the church, which means what? We're getting back to our control issue here. Of course, Augustine had to say that people were evil and convince them that they couldn't do anything good. He's got to keep them in a state of peasantry. He's got to keep them in a state of servitude. Because why? Fiefdom had to continue. The Roman the Roman political system had to continue. And I could get into all kinds of things on how Augustine designed this system around that thought process. And here we are, evangelical Christians today saying, oh, yeah, I believe in the rapture, I believe in this. And they don't even know why. They don't even realize that this comes from Marcion, who believed there were two gods. Okay, I think I got it out of my system. Let's find out. The reason why this is relevant is because, guys, we need to really kind of ask the question: what does it mean, Esau have hated? Now, I will tell you, this particular verse has a lot of controversy behind it, right? Especially when you mess with people who are either skeptics or opponents of the Bible. For example, Islam, who tries to disprove that Jacob should have received the blessing in the first place, and state that Jacob, of course, was a liar and everything else. Okay, so here we go. So where are we finding that concept? We're finding that concept in Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Okay, so let's jump over to Malachi. And it says, the pronouncement of the word of Yahweh to Yisrael through Malachi. I have loved you, says Yahweh, but you say, how have you loved us? Was Esau not Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh? Yet I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau, and I made his mountains a desolation, and have given his inheritance to the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been beaten down, but we will return and build up the ruins. This is what Yahweh of armies says. They may build, but I will tear down. And people will call them the territory of wickedness, and people with whom Yahweh is indignant forever. And your eyes will see this, and you will say, Yahweh be exalted beyond the border of Israel. Okay. So before I get too far into this, I want to talk a little bit about some of the mystical visions that are mentioned in the extra biblical texts, say Talmud or Zohar or Book of Yasher or any of those other books that talk about some of this history that we're talking about, the Midrash Rabbah, is that all three patriarchs were given a vision of the future of their generations. Now, like we had discussed last week, it's perhaps that the ladder Sulam that Yaakov saw was actually legitimately a ladder of his descendants all the way up to Yeshua, and he saw Yeshua. Some great midrash last week. You should go back and watch it. But the premise is, and this is important, is that every one of the patriarchs saw what was going to happen to their descendants. How do we know that? Because Yeshua says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Okay? So we have to assume that if Yahweh turns around and makes a covenant with Isaac and explains something about his descendants, that he gives them the vision of his descendants. And we know that Jacob saw something, and I can't remember where that's referenced in the narratives of Yeshua, but Yeshua mentions something about Jacob experiencing something about Yeshua, but I can't remember what it was. Anyways, the point being is that we can see, if Jacob sees what happens to his descendants, then he will see that when the northern kingdom is ransacked, the northern kingdom being what? The nation of Israel, and very specifically the Ephraimites, right, is ransacked by the king of Assyria, Edom goes in and loots Israel. Obadiah is where we need to be. And guess what? That's this week's Haftarah, right? Esau gets in trouble for what? For raiding Israel after they were invaded. And it says Esau rose up with pride, living in cliffs and feeling that he's safe, but really the God of Israel is angry with him. And then what's interesting is then it goes into how it's going to be ransacked. No stone left on another, so to speak, right? I don't think it actually says that. It's close to that, right? It says what will happen to their children and all this stuff in Obadiah. So is it possible that the hate for Esau doesn't develop until Esau does something against Jacob? Well, then we have to ask the question, did Jacob see this? And that's why he sent Malachim, which we've established is probably not men, because Esau, Torah is very, very clear to say that Esau sends men, but Jacob sends Malachim, which JPS Tanakh, Complete Jewish Bible, NASB, King James, etc., all translate Malachim in verse 1 as angels, Malachim in verse 3 as messengers, and in verse 6 as messengers. And yet Jacob finds it necessary that whoever these Malachim are in verse 1 to keep the camps separate. He could have said, this is one camp of my army, but he doesn't. He makes a distinction and he honors it. Whoever they were different. And they were different enough that he had to make a distinction. He had to make a different separation. He had to make a separation between whatever this camp was and whatever his camp was. So my first question, and this is an important one, is could we possibly, because obviously we don't want to do minority report here, right? We don't want to say that Yahweh already sees how somebody's going to be and therefore deals with them, because Paul made clear that is not what happened, right? No, neither child having done good nor evil. And so we need to get our heads wrapped around that it was not predestined for Esau to be evil. Esau made a choice, and there's a point in time where Yahweh is so fed up with it that he shuts it down. We definitely need to get into the word hate, which is saneh. Saneh is the word for hate. Okay. So I want to address some things, okay? The first thing I want to address is to say that you cannot get the full story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from the Bible. The 66-book compendium that the Protestant synods decided was sufficient enough to be their canon does not mean that it is the only information out there. And for those of you who take offense to that, so the first thing I'm going to say is, number one is, your theology was not developed until the 1500s, whereas the theology that I'm referencing predates Yeshua and is maintained in the proper religions that are of the Messiah. So I understand if it's offensive for me to say that there's more information about the patriarchs than just the Bible, because you want to make the Bible into something that it's not. The Torah was a mouth-to-mouth communication. Yahweh said, I'll speak to a prophet through visions and dreams. So now we could take all the Nevi'im of the Tanakh, all of the prophets, and by the way, Joshua and Judges are prophets, and say they were not the Torah. Joshua stands up and says, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouths, but you shall meditate upon it day and night. And in doing so, you will have success. He didn't say this book of the law and Joshua once it's written, or this book of the law and Matthew once it's written. He says, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. What book of the law? The law of Moses, the Torah. In fact, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say book of the law. It's Sefer HaTorah. Sefer HaTorah. Okay, so Torah as a compendium supersedes Joshua. Joshua's prophets. So we can, from that, we can deduce that when Yahweh says, when I speak to the prophets, I speak through visions and dreams, but not so my servant Moses. And Paul turns around and says that all scripture is God-breathed Torah. Okay? Okay. Glad we have that figured out, because now what we can do is say, if that is so, if there is a clear and deeper connection into the context of Esau I have hated, then you would agree with me, we probably need to check the other books. And of course we have, right? We've found in the book of Yashar that Esau kills Nimrod, who is considered the progenitor of idolatry. Nimrod was a metaphysicist, sorcerer, king who hunted humans for sport. In fact, it's very possible that some of the historical references to some of the human sacrifices that have happened in, say, Mesopotamia or in Mesoamerica are actually Nimrodic. Yes, I just made that word up. In nature. Meaning what? Meaning that we need to really rethink our understanding. Esau made choices. In fact, I believe it is either in Zohar or it is in Talmud. I think it's in Talmud, where basically, and you guys know Talmud is actually a commentary on Mishnah. And Mishnah is a compilation of the oral traditions or the folklore of the Jews. Or better yet, the folklore of the Israelites. Now, why is this important? Because, truth be told, and this is very relevant, is that we actually have information indicating that Esau made a choice so bad that Yahweh, like with Cain, marked Esau. And that whatever Cain got himself into was sufficient enough to bring a flood on the earth. Esau, or Edom, seems to have carried the torch. Now, there's a couple ways we could get into this. We could say, okay, is it because Yahweh made a covenant with Jacob and Jacob went ahead and initiated the covenant, or something like that, that he doesn't like Esau because Esau wants to kill Jacob, yeah, we could potentially get into that. We could get into the idea that God makes friends with somebody and somebody is his enemy. Therefore, the enemy of my friend is my enemy. We could. Because if there is anything that you could learn by reading between the lines of the Bible as your 66 book compendium, it's that Yahweh wants a personal and practical love relationship with every human being. And he's gone to great lengths to make sure that that's that way. And remember, Paul, in his arguments in Romans, is trying to establish a Gentile inclusion, which was Rabbi Hillel's style of thinking, not Shammai's. Rabbi Hillel believed that the Gentiles could be converted. Rabbi Hillel believed that the Gentiles could obtain a Jewish soul by conversion, becoming a Baal HaTeshuvah, a master of repentance. In fact, I think it's in Talmud, it says that if a Gentile was to repent and become a proselyte, they are more righteous than someone who's been born in the faith. Because someone who's born in the faith doesn't repent the way they do, because they don't know what they were missing until they're told that that's what they were missing. Whereas a person who's born Jewish has the life, has the lifestyle, has the benefits of Torah from birth. But here comes a Gentile who learns of the benefits of Torah, begins to act out the things of Torah, and therefore receives the rewards of Torah, is more blessed than someone who's born into it. That's what they say. That's what they say. Now, there's opponents to that, right? I believe Hasidic Judaism is an opponent to that, whereas the Maggid is not. The Maggid believes more in a Gentile inclusion. But the point being is that Rabbi Shaul, Paul, is arguing these things in Romans. And we go and we make inappropriate doctrine with it. But what's really crazy is that there's people who believe that God created Esau to fail. So my first question is, did God create Esau to fail? Is that what Romans is saying here? Because if it is, it doesn't matter what Jacob does. It doesn't matter what Jacob does. Now, the Talmud, which is basically the Tosfeta and the Gemara, which is basically the common interpretation and the higher eldership interpretation of Mishnah, says this. It says that Esau made choices that were so contrary to Torah that they were irreversible, right? But furthermore, it says that the reason why Isaac was not blessed by Abraham is because Isaac would have had to have passed that blessing to Esau. And the reason Isaac says to Jacob, the Lord bring these things to you, is because he knew that he could not pass the birthright blessing to Esau. Even if he knew that Jacob was actually the one. Remember, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the scent or the smell and the feeling is that of Esau. Well, the rabbis say that it was because of that coat that Jacob was wearing. He's wearing Esau's sorcerer coat. And therefore, Isaac could see the darkness, but he couldn't see the light of his son Jacob. And so that way, Isaac was innocent in asking God to put the covenant upon whoever it was that was wearing that coat at that moment. Now, what's powerful about this and what's important about this is the coat was already there. And if that's the case, guess what? Esau was already wicked. Now we understand Esau I have hated, Jacob I have loved. Right? But let's talk a minute about Malachi, because Malachi has two very important things that seem to be present. And the first one is that it seems as though whoever Malachi is writing to is ignorant of realities that should have been second nature understanding. I have loved you. How have you loved me? Because Esau I have hated, and Jacob I have loved, and you are Jacob. It is important that you understand that he did not say, Abraham I have loved. He did not say, Isaac I have loved. Oh, what Torah does in its omissions. You never see Abraham activate the covenant. You never see Isaac activate the covenant, but you see Jacob say, if you'll do these things, I'll do this. And who actually has more than one kid that's going to pass down the blessing? I mean, guys, Abraham had a crap ton of kids, but only Isaac got the blessing. And then Isaac has two, but only one gets the blessing. And then Jacob has 12, and all of them get the blessing. Because Jacob activated covenant, which means we get back to this concept that Hebrew lifestyle, Hebrew language, Hebrew culture is an action-based system. The word love is not some abstract concept, nor is it some reductionist concept of hormones. It's an action. And it's demonstrated through tangible assets of that action. Okay? So why is it so important? Because now we understand that Esau was not created evil. Esau was not chosen to be evil. There's an irony to the fact that this is the core verse of heretical filth propagated by the Christian theologists of not only the Catholic Church, but the Protestant Church, that God would do something so asinine. Oh, he's sovereign. You know what? I don't care. I will tell you right now, that is not one God I will serve, and I will lead as many as I can to believe that same thing. I will not serve that kind of God. So if God created me to go to hell, fine. Problem is I've experienced all the evidence of salvation. So then the next question is do I get away with what I'm saying because of the preservation of the saints? That's what the Calvinists would argue. Some would argue, oh, you can't say that if you're saved. Okay, yeah, gotcha. What's my point here? My point here is that this thing was not a plan, it was an adjustment. Esau wasn't hated because of some sovereign choice. That's not what it says. It says that he would call them. And Esau didn't answer the call. Not because of merit, but because he didn't answer the call. They jumped it. Many are called, few are chosen. The chosen ones, the unconditional election, are the only ones that Christ died for. Meaning that if you try to give the gospel to somebody who's destined to go to hell, then they can't receive it. Oh, the darkness of that thought process. Yes, absolutely. 100% opponent of that filth. I am definitely that. But my point here is that these angels are here without merit of good or evil, but also they seem to be assisting the one who is in covenant. Any thoughts before I go any further? And I know Paul K has a question. We're going to have her ask that.
Not now, right? Or do you want me to ask it now?
Yeah, you can ask it now.
Okay. So my question was, why would Jacob need the spiritual help from angels? And is it because and why was he getting that? Was it because he had stepped into the, I guess the best way to say it is the full responsibility of the covenant between him and Elohim?
Okay.
Because if so, I want my spiritual SWAT team too.
It does definitely beg an important pointed part of that question, right? Is it about merit in the sense of something good that Jacob did? Yes and no, right? But it's more about the relational connection between the covenantee and the covenantor, right?
So
Again,
they were there to make sure that he fought. They were there to help guide his path, to protect his path.
or were they? Right?
Or were they?
And
yeah.
and so here's the thing. He happens upon them. He encounters them. And actually, you know what? It might behoove us to actually go look at that first verse and see what the verbs are there in the Hebrew. That might be a good plan. Let's do that. Crashed on me.
I'm sorry. I don't always mean to take us off course.
Oh, no, I don't feel like this is. And that's why I told you to save it till now. Okay, so in the Hebrew, it says Yaakov, Yaakov halach, he walked, right? In the path, in his path. That's what it says. Or he walked for the sake of his path. And then he encounters this, and then we encounter this word, right? Which is pagah. Okay.
Strong's H 6293. Pagah. Pagah.
Yeah, so that's probably a bad way to pronounce it. There is no ah in Hebrew, but okay. Anyways, so the premise is that basically, to encounter, meet, reach, entreat, make intercession, right? It's used 46 times, so it's probably well translated, as opposed to other things that are only appear like 9 times. And so we'll accept this concept of encountering. In fact, let's take a look here at the Arabic word right here, which is, so, you know what, it's so scribbly I can't read it. But I'm looking in this area right here, and I can't necessarily pronounce that word, but to light upon, to afflict, right? Or to happen to. And so it's interesting. We're not necessarily talking about meeting in the sense of, okay, so let's talk a minute about some of the Hebrew concepts of meeting. Okay, so One is that you intentionally are going to meet with another in some sort of parlay. So you two are going to come together and discuss or negotiate something, right? Another word in the Hebrew for meeting is that you actually accidentally stumble into or stumble upon. This word is more about you meeting, as in you impinging upon or you intruding upon. So, interestingly enough, it seems as though maybe this camp was not intended for Jacob, or perhaps maybe Jacob didn't approach it correctly. Thoughts?
Like happened upon them.
Yeah. I mean, it seems as though it was not intended for him to encounter the camp because of the Hebrew word there. Let's continue with that, though.
When you break down the word pagat pictographically, I don't remember how it was written out exactly.
Well, I can do that. I can definitely do that because I went ahead and put my lexicon on this tablet. Go ahead, though.
Well, I don't remember the
Yeah,
the lettering.
Okay, I'll do it then.
Okay.
Let's see, where's that at? Where's my library? There it is. I think if half of you saw some of the books in my library, you'd throw a fit. Because they're either politically or religiously charged. Okay, so now I'm just gonna put in the Strong's Concordance number, and then after I do that, I will pull it up for you guys on the share screen. Interesting. Okay. I will go ahead and pull that up, and I'm not gonna give you any bias about the outcome. I'll just go ahead and let you see it for yourselves. Okay, so the parent root is right here. I'll go ahead and highlight that in yellow. How come that's not highlighting? There we go. All right, so it means the concrete is unripe or fig or foul or carcass. The abstract is to encounter. Okay. I think I should probably bring this up real quick. And I'll just do it from right here. A couple things that need to be pointedly apparent. Number one is that in Hebrew thought, if you can't see it, hear it, or touch it, it doesn't exist. But abstract concepts that are not tangible can be explained through concrete concepts in an idiomatic manner. And what I mean by that is it's a figure of speech, right? You never actually see it literally say encounter. So let's find out how or why, okay? So getting getting back into this, you'll notice something very disturbing, and that is that there's no pictographic definition for our discussion here. And we'll get back to that. But then also, so we have unable to fulfill the role intended for. That is really something, isn't it? An inedible fruit. Interesting. So the pay gimel together mean something that can't be used for its intended purpose. For example, hafag right here is unable to work, right? A ceasing, but interestingly enough, not a Shabbat, right? And then we've got pug, which is numbness, right? To be numb or devoid of sensation or emotion. Boy, we could get into a lot there. And then we've got pagal, something that stinks or is rotten, as being unfit or unusable, right? Interesting. This word paga right here, that word paga right there, or I'm sorry, faga right there. Actually, it might be paga, come to think of it, because that's the penultimate. Is to touch or grasp, to get up, or as far as to come together in meeting by chance, or to give place in the sense of a meeting. Okay. An encounter. And I believe there is our Hebrew word, right? There's our Hebrew word. Right there is our Strong's Concordance number, right? Oops. Right here. Strong's Concordance number H6263. So when we're dealing with this word, it seems as though it has something to do with it being unintended or unusable, or that it's not intended to have been used. I wonder if that makes sense. What a strange word to have in our verse about angels. But now I'm going to just throw something out there that's actually going to kind of tweak your brain. That word paga being used there as this unintended encounter, it gets kind of deep. Okay, let me share. Right here. In him. So really what this says, because this is third person masculine plural, which means those male beings intruded, as it were, in him. Malakei Elohim. Messengers, angels of Elohim. Intruded or encountered in him. So it was not Jacob doing it, it was them doing it. Yeah. That part, I can tell you, is very enlightening. We need to we need to go ahead and take a brief break. And then we can come back to this. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pause it for a minute. You can just fast forward the video if you're watching it later, and I'll get us back here in Okay, so we're back a little bit early, but okay, so one of the things that we probably need to take care of is the concept of when does Yahweh communicate that he hates Esau, right? Because what are we getting into here? First of all, I want to establish, are these angels here because God is sovereign and he chose Jacob and he chose Esau to go to hell? Are the angels here because Jacob merited them in the sense of entering into covenant with Yahweh, accepting the covenant and believing God? I mean, listen, I know that Paul made the argument in Romans, and it definitely says it in Torah, that Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness, but you don't understand the word righteousness. You don't understand that Paul is making an argument there, a theological argument based on an idiomatic thought of Abraham's abundance that he had received from God. Because righteousness is exactly that. It is an equal distribution of wealth. It is not a right act or right living. Okay? And so, in principle, we need to get past the sovereignty of God. We need to get past the unconditional election, and we need to get past the conditional election. Why does it have to be so complex? Why can't we just go with the simplicity that Abraham was offered a covenant from God and had some blessings and had some relational connections with God, but truth be told is he was not allowed to pass the blessing to Isaac, because then Esau would have received the actual birthright blessing. Isaac was not able to bless Jacob, so he asks God to bless Jacob, and Jacob is offered a covenant without any merit of good or evil and accepts. So can I just throw out there that Esau was given the same opportunity? Because that's what it actually says in Romans. Not according to him who does, but to him who calls. Right? Now, we could get into the nitty-gritty of the Greek there, and I could still have this argument with you. Paul K says, why were the angels there? Were they there because of Jacob's covenant? Were they there just because they were there? Well, according to the Hebrew word, they actually intervened in Jacob's walk. It says, halach, right? Le draco, walked his path. And the angels of Elohim met him. No, they intruded upon his path. So where do I look? I looked at whoever these Malachim are, whether they be a spiritual being beyond the sight of a man that only sometimes reveal themselves, or they be more than that. It is important that we answer this question. Did Jacob end up utilizing them to deal with Esau? That question is going to be, or it's going to have something to do with the concept behind the angels being there in the first place. And that part I think is important, but very specifically, we got to kind of get our minds wrapped around the response from Esau in the first place. So I think one of the things I want to say is I think that we can find some wisdom in the Torah mentioning men instead of messengers. So this is what I want you to think about. If Esau was for peace, would he sent an army? And the rabbis argue this. Let's say probably Stone Edition, Tanakh, probably Art Scroll Edition, Chumash, probably both contain commentary from, I want to say maybe it's Ibn Ezra. It might have been Rashi. And it says what? It says right in there, Esau was not for peace. Sending 400 men against Jacob's angels was not for peace. Esau should have bowed, but he didn't. Jacob did, which consequently Moses learned from, according to the sages. Moses understood about bowing from Jacob. Okay, so now let's get into this a little bit, because now we have something interesting going on, and that is that after the messengers return, all of a sudden something happens with Jacob. Jacob sends all of the children and the wives and the livestock across, separating out the gift for Esau from the rest, which consequently there was about 530 to 580 head of livestock, which consequently some sages say is 1/10 of Jacob's wealth. Some say it was half of Jacob's wealth. Some say it was a double portion of what the birthright would have been for Esau had. So basically he had superseded his father's wealth and was now giving Esau his birthright back. Regardless of what's going on, the next thing that happens is he ends up wrestling somebody. Okay, so let's read that. Let's talk about that, and then after that we will take a break, and then we'll resume our next session, our later in the afternoon session. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at these verses, because I think people have made some mistakes about who Jacob is wrestling. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to go down to verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have contended with God and with men and have prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip, which is on the socket of the hip, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the tendon of the hip. Okay. So, first of all, Jacob receives the name Yisrael here, which is what? What is Yisrael? Let's study that out first, but let me just make some mentions here. Number one, and this is important, Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled him. Okay? A man. Now, there are some theologians and there are some advanced studiers of scripture, students of theology, who argue that this could be a Christophany. We'll talk a little bit about what a Christophany is, but the important thing here is that some believe that this was Christ. Okay? So a Christophany is basically a belief that Christ appeared in the Old Testament to the patriarchs and saints as a man, and this is an example of where he did this. Now, I'm going to propose that the Messiah could not come until the fourth day. And although he was slain from the foundations of the earth, that was retroactive upon him being slain at the at Golgotha on the torture stake in the fourth day of the prophetic 1,000-year period. I'm going to propose to you that he cannot appear in the Old Testament, because that would violate the prophecy of the fourth day, which consequently, that prophecy doesn't come until after Jacob. So let's say that we release the doctrinal error of Christophany. Then we're confronted with the concept of avatar. What is an avatar? Well, it is actually a Hindu belief that men can be possessed by gods because they're actually spiritual shells. And those spiritual shells can then become that god in that moment. That was not a Hebrew belief. We don't find that in any discussions about prophets. We don't find that in any discussions about humans. In Judaism, in Talmud, not even in Zohar do we encounter things like this. So the concept of an avatar, again, has a problem. So this man that he wrestles, why did he wrestle him? And when or how was this wrestling occurring? So there are a few things that are important here. One of them is that however it works out, when Jacob starts to win, the man, quote unquote, touches Jacob's hip. Okay? However, it's interesting because, first of all, it doesn't say hip per se in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it says thigh, but very specifically, it is the location of the loins. Okay? So we could align with the idea that the ligament in Jacob's hip was damaged in the wrestling. Got him in a submission hold and popped his hip out. It's very, very possible. But this was a man. But then Jacob asks, or and then the man says, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. Has that ever bothered anybody? Has anybody else ever thought, why would God care if the dawn was breaking? Who would be attached to darkness, and that their power or their ability came from the night? Why would it be that they would have to leave because the sun was rising, right? But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Whoa. This is something. If you pay attention, you'll get a hint as to what's happening here. And I want to remind you that Torah does not make mistakes. Torah does not leave anything out unless it needs to be left out. And when there's something that is the same in one verse and another verse, guess what? That's remez. That's second level Hebrew interpretation. And it is more than just the literal. So here we go. Then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, he who contends with God, or God contends. And I want to just point out to you that this could have been Yisrael, but it wasn't. It was Yisrael. Now, if you follow the heretical theology of the divine council, then you would say, oh, wait a minute, this is not Yahweh, this is El. And so now Jacob is wrestling with El and not with Yahweh. If you follow the concept that Yahweh embodied this man or appeared as a man and Jacob wrestled him, then how come when this man who encounters Abraham is referenced as, and Yahweh appeared to Abraham, and Abraham saw three men, right? As opposed to this one where there's no reference to Elohim or Yahweh, but the name itself is God fights, or fighter of God, right? Wrestler, nope, that's not the right word there. So why does this person, this man, tell him his name is Israel? Okay, now, and Yaakov asked him and said, please tell me your name. And he says, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel. Peniel, right? Not Peniah. This is not the face of Yahweh. For he said, I have seen Elohim face to face, and yet my life has been spared. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel. Notice it's not Peniel, it's Penuel. Now all of a sudden it's the name is changed again. And if you miss that, a yod gets changed to a vav, and don't study that out, you will miss something pretty amazing. I'm not going to bring it up today. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip, which is on the socket of the hip, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the tendon of his hip. Okay? All right. But now, let me share my screen so you can see this for yourself. Chapter 32. I'm sorry, chapter 33. Then Jacob raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel, and the two slave women. He put the slave women and their children in front, and Leah and her children next to Rachel and Joseph in the back. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times. Very important, until he came near to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. He raised his eyes and saw the women and children, said, "Who are these?" And he said, "So the children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the slave women came forward, and their children, they bowed down, and Leah likewise came forward and bowed down. And afterwards Joseph came forward with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in your sight, my lord." And Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother, but I will let what you have be your own." Jacob said, "No, if now I have found favor in your sight, then accept my gift from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God." Watch this. Penny Elohim. I want you to understand that he just told Esau that he was talking to Esau, and he was like, "You, sir, are, when I look at you, I see the face of God." Who did he wrestle? Who did he wrestle in his mother's womb? I propose to you that the reason why Jacob was asking him for a blessing was because he wanted released from the debt. He wanted released from the death vow that Esau had taken. He bows 7 times. When you seven yourself, you are swearing an oath. He tries to give Esau either a 10th or a double portion of his father's inheritance. I've matched my father's inheritance and gotten more than that, and here's double what you were supposed to receive in your blessing. I believe, and this is important, I believe that Jacob was trying to clear the slate, so to speak. Esau shows up in the middle of the night to try to kill Jacob. Jacob wrestles with him and prevails. And so Esau breaks his hip. In fact, interestingly enough, we don't see Jacob called Israel until after Yahweh says, "Your name is going to be Israel," in another place. And who else would be stuck to the night in their power but wicked Esau? You see, Esau isn't hated until he is. So it says, "I've hated you and I destroyed your land." Obadiah prophesies that Edom's land would be destroyed because he what? Looted Israel when they were taken captive. So why did he hate Esau? He hated him because of that fact. Share your thoughts with me. You don't have to agree with me, but you got to prove me wrong. If you can. Share your thoughts with me. Is it a head wrecker? Not quite what you would have expected? This isn't my idea, by the way. This is in some, I think it might have been Ibn Ezra. I think it was Ibn Ezra who said that it was Esau he had wrestled. And says, because it is written, I see you as I see the face of God, Peniel. He named the place Peniel. And then he turns around and calls his brother Peniel. Peniel Elohim. You get my point here. So what's the relevance that Esau figures out that Jacob's name is going to be Yisrael? If we accept this interpretation that Esau is who wrestles Jacob, now I know when we Midrash this last year, I said that Jacob wrestled himself. And it makes sense because he was alone and he wrestled a man. And truth be told, is Jacob very apparently did not walk in his name. But as I was studying this morning, I said, oh my gosh, look at that. Jacob calls Esau face of God. Right? Come here. Get up here. Come on. Come on. Get up here. Sorry. Dog's having a nightmare. Come on. Get up here. You're okay. Come here. Okay. So in principle, then we probably need to make some adjustments in our thinking here. Because if Esau was whom Jacob wrestled, and what Jacob is trying to do is create a rectification, because Jacob is a student of Torah according to the fact that he went to Shem's yeshiva, which is a school of Torah. We have some interesting thoughts we need to work through, right? Okay, so we're going to take a break a little bit early. And actually, no, we're actually about right on time, in about 6 minutes. This will, of course, be a longer break than the one we just took. But I want to come back and I want to see if I can rock your world with an idea that is so powerful, it is absolutely missed in the English. It's in the Hebrew, and consequently is conceptually about this story and this parasha specifically. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions? Paula K., did your question get answered?
Yes, my question got answered, and I do have another one.
Let's roll.
So when I was reading that this week, when I was reading verse 29, talking about those two different words, Peniel and Penuel, my brain just kept going to the pineal gland, to the awakening of, however you want to call it, the third eye, your intuition, waking up more. And that's kind of where I saw a lot of this wrestling going on, wrestling within ourselves, and kind of the time, the cycle that we're in as well. It kind of fitted in there with that as well. But now that you've brought up a concept of Jacob was wrestling Esau, that kind of fits in along with that even better.
Yeah, and I mean, we could get a little bit crazy here and say that there actually was not two people.
Yeah.
That Esau and Jacob were the same person. I can't remember who posed that thought. It was some cosmic weirdo rabbi that most of the other rabbis threw under the bus, but I think he's the one that said Jacob and Esau are the same person, and that the story is not literal, but is about the ego versus the higher self. That's fine. I mean, when we have 72 possible interpretations of this verse, we could probably jive with that one of them could have a metaphysical, Jungian philosophy behind it. Sure. But I think a more important idea here is that it was not God. And when he says, I saw Elohim face to face and did not die, when we come back for the third session, I'm going to see if I can light up your world a little bit with a different perspective here. But keep in mind that there's a lot of things that Jacob could have said to Esau when he encountered him, but he flat out says, face of God. Okay. For those of you who have to go and are not going to make it to the last session, we'll say Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are going to stay, we'll be back in about probably 30 to 45 minutes or so, and we will get into the Rabbi's Nugget. Shabbat Shalom.